Hi, Niklas. What was your first computer?
My first computer, I think it was a Commodore 64. And the first programming language was BASIC, because that was actually the machine I started to develop, at least my very first steps.
So you got this C64 and you started programming immediately?
Yeah, well, not immediately. Obviously, it was not my computer, but my family's computer, and we started to play games as everyone. But yeah, I was very curious to figure out how all of this works, right? And one of my friends actually had one and had started a little earlier, so I wanted to try it myself. Mm-hmm. And it was very interesting. It was really simple things, right? Things like change the color of a font, these types of things, very first steps. But yeah, that was my first experience.
Exactly. Changing the color of the font. This was actually fairly easy with BASIC. I also did it. I completely forgot about that. It was buggy color or something, right? What was the command?
I don't remember.
Something like that. So it was, yeah, exactly. And what was your favorite game back then? So, or what was your first game you saw on the C64?
I think it was Frogger. You know Frogger?
No. What is it?
It was like what's it called? Run and all these called these games.
Like platform game. So where like Super Mario 2D where.
Yes, something like that. Yes.
Okay.
So and everything 2-dimensional, obviously. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it was pretty cool. And then my next computer was actually a PC. I think a 286. It was called, one of the first PCs. And that one I got several years later. And that was the one where I really started to program. And I think it was Turbo Pascal, as far as I remember. Mm-hmm. And I started to borrow books and learned everything myself. And I gave myself a challenge to program a game. Mm-hmm. And it was a shooter game. And it was a lot of fun to program. And I actually looked the other day whether I still have the source code, because I wanted to open source it just for fun. Mm-hmm. But I couldn't find it anymore. It's too bad. But yeah, that was... That was really exciting. The first time I actually finished something that other people could use as well was a really good feeling.
Okay. And back then with C64, there was no serious programming you did? So you just, you used BASIC to script some stuff, or was it something more?
It was really easy stuff. So I remember correctly. I mean, this is so long ago, but you could buy some magazines and they would contain source code for games that you would have to type mm-hmm. manually. Mm-hmm. And then I was trying to understand, what I would type there. And I think mm-hmm. that's, again, made me curious to learn more about this technology. But yeah, it was rather simple stuff for sure. I mean, I was only like maybe 10 or maybe
the ratio of time spent between gaming and programming? So you spend more time gaming or more time programming?
It was probably more gaming, I guess.
Okay. And the 8086 computer, or the whatever it was, the PC?
286.
286, yeah. Okay. You started immediately programming, or you also played games back then?
No, that one I actually started to do program right away.
Okay. No gaming anymore?
Yeah, no gaming anymore. I mean, I'm not really a gamer, but... Again, I wanted to program something that other people could use, and that's why I chose that game to develop. And okay. I also used the PC to create the magazine for my school for the end of the school. Mm-hmm. So I used Microsoft Word, I guess it was at that time. Mm-hmm. Well, I'm not sure anymore. Those types of things, and then graphic programs. So mm-hmm. yeah.
Which school was it?
Steps. It was a local school here, mm-hmm. Gymnasium here in close to where I live. Mm-hmm. So yeah.
Cool. And so you started hacking, programming, and you wrote your first game. Did it work? So it was a shooter game. What was the name of the game?
UFO. What's the English word for it?
UFO. So it is.
Yeah, it's probably the same. Yeah, it was very simple, right? So basically, you could only use the cursor keys mm-hmm. to move left and right, and mm-hmm. then you could move the up key to actually shoot. And you would mm-hmm. shoot 3 at one time, and the UFO was flying at the top. So that was it.
Okay, yeah, at least something. I mean, it was a casual game. And what I wanted to ask you is how you got the idea to programming. So you knew that you can do something with a computer, beyond playing, or why you wanted to do this? So this is all...
that's a good question. I mean, I guess it was because I talked with other people. Sometimes they were older, sometimes in my class who had already a computer, and they would tell me all the things that they are able to do. And I remember at that time also, I think the first graphical user interfaces came up. The first Windows user interfaces, and then there was actually the latest and greatest version of Turbo Pascal, who would allow you to build your own graphical user experiences. And I found that very, very interesting, and something I wanted to do because, I used these graphical programs like Windows, Word, and others, right? And I wanted to be able to do something similar. And I don't know why, but that really motivated me to do more.
Okay, cool. So what was the next app you wrote after UFO?
I think that was in university, and I don't remember exactly what it was. So probably some exercises or classes that we had to take.
So you became demotivated after hacking the UFO. You lost interest in programming.
Well, I didn't really lose interest, but at one point the computer became very old and outdated.
Okay.
And there was no way for me to get a new one until just a couple of years later. And then when I went to university, I had the chance again to use better machines and better software. And that's when I picked it up again. And then after that, I never ended again until today. So
okay. So at the university, you learned a different programming language, or you stick with Turbo Pascal?
No. What was it? It was, so in the last year, it was actually Java that I remember. But before that, it was something else, another object-oriented programming language. I forgot what it was. And there were a couple of other programming languages I also used to work at the university. And there was, I forgot what it was. It's too long ago.
Okay, and where was the university?
In Paderborn, which is, as you know, right in the middle of Germany here.
Okay, nice. It's actually a nice area. And how you got the idea to study computer science?
Well, I wanted to. So first of all, I wanted to study just development. But then people told me at the university that it would be stupid just only to learn development. They said it's much better to do a mixture of economy and programming, right? Because they said, and that's really funny because they said at the time, and that was like 25 years ago, they said that everything was already developed and there's no point to have new developers, to have more developers. And
okay,
it's amazing.
Yeah, but back then I think who was it? I think Bill Gates had a similar theory, right? Like there will be no Bill Gates who said it. There will be there is no need for more than one computer.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's funny. And then the thing is that at that university there was strong, let's say, community and a well-known professor who specialized on collaboration technologies, especially IBM Notes and IBM Domino. And that I found very interesting, and that's why I basically worked on that for the next 15 years, right? Because I like being able to build new applications with rapid application development techniques so that you see the value kind of immediately. I really loved that, and that's one of the things that Nodes Domino was really good in, right? You didn't have to do much. You didn't have to be, a low-level developer. You could very easily define your simple, let's say, line of business applications from which users could benefit immediately, right? So that's what I really liked. And again, I think that was one of the biggest strengths of IBM Nodes Domino at that time.
So you had the opportunity to program nodes at the university?
Indirectly. So I wrote my master thesis at the university, and it used Nodes Domino, but I also worked in parallel for a startup. And that startup built a product called Lotus Workflow, which was an extension to IBM Nodes Domino, right? So there I implemented Nodes Domino, Lotus Script, etc., but then also Java. I created the first Java user interface for a workflow tool, which would run in the browser. It was a Java applet with all the pros and cons, primarily cons, but it was a lot of fun and a good learning experience as well.
I think it was nearly the same time. I also had to use Lotus Nodes as a database. And we had to integrate it from Java. And there was, I kind of a JDBC driver, I remember. What I also remember is there was a product called Octopus or something, like the Office extension for Nodes, and we also had to integrate. So Nodes was big back then, and this was like a huge. It was, I think, even before 2000. It was around 2000.
It was even before. Yeah.
And your startup did well.
Well, it was acquired by IBM. So yes. The thing is, I started to work there knowing that I wouldn't earn money because they were basically bankrupt. They didn't have money anymore. Okay. So people couldn't be paid. But I started to work there anyway because I knew that rumor that IBM has an interest to acquire the company.
Ah, cool.
So, and that worked out perfectly for me because just 2 months later, the acquisition happened, and I was one of the lucky ones who got an offer to move over to Boston.
Okay.
So yeah, and that worked out perfectly for me. And I really wanted to go to the US. I remember that exactly. My English wasn't good. It was even worse than today, right? And I remember I went over there and they told me, what I would earn. And I agreed. I said, yes, absolutely. I want to do that. As it turned out, I didn't even understand what they offered me because when I got my first paycheck, it was like 60% more. So
okay, cool.
It's, I really wanted to work there no matter what, right? It wasn't because of the money. I wanted to have an adventure. I wanted to learn new stuff. I wanted to try out new things. And that was just perfect for me, right? Because it allowed me to work there. And that's why I worked for teams in the US for like 15 or 18 years, actually.
In Boston?
No, I was there. I lived there for 3 years. Oh, well, 1.5 years full time. And then my girlfriend at the time wanted to move back. So I started to travel every 2 weeks back and forth between Boston and Paderborn. At one point, I stopped doing that, and I basically only worked remotely, except of some business trips, obviously.
Why? So why your strategy was so indirect? So why you didn't just apply it right away to work in USA somewhere? So why you had to join the startups and wait until they buy you?
Well, I'm not sure how it works today, but back then, it was really hard. I would say almost impossible, right? Like there was this green card lottery, but you would have to be very, very lucky to win a green card. Otherwise, you had to have a visa, an H1. Was it an H1? I forgot. But that one you would only get if you would work in a company in Germany, which belongs to a US company.
Okay.
So it wasn't so. As far as I understand, it wasn't even possible to just, go to the US directly.
So you wanted to work in USA. You didn't want to work for IBM, right? So you wanted to work for IBM in USA. This was your strategy, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Exactly. Okay. Well, at that point, I wasn't really thinking about IBM, to be honest. It was Lotus back then. Even though Lotus was still acquired by IBM, it was still basically a separate entity, right? But soon after that, I think 2 or 3 years later, it was really IBM.
Yeah. And back then, I would say in the early 2000s, Lotus Notes didn't have a great name, but it was actually one of the first NoSQL databases, right? So they
yes,
yeah, and it was based on actually CouchDB, right? So the main developer from Nodes went over and tried to re-engineer the backend from Nodes, and so this is how I think CouchDB happened, right?
Yes, I mean, it did base on CouchDB, right? Because the Nodes SQL was done first. And then, as you said, one of the developers founded CouchDB. Yes, that's true.
Yeah.
And the thing that I really love about IBM Nodes Domino, right? And I think that's the main reason why it was so successful back then is that everything you need to build applications comes in one box. Like you install a Domino server, just a couple of minutes. And then you get a database, you get security, you get, a tool to write code. You can do replication for offline access and everything, right? Everything in one box, an organization directory. No need to set up any other software to do simple things. And I think that's a brilliant concept. And I think that's also one of the reasons why OpenShift is so successful. because it's kind of similar when you think about it, because it gives you everything that Kubernetes has, and Kubernetes is great and everyone likes it, but it's way too hard to use. So they add, a Docker registry to it, and they add, a deployment pipeline to it, that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And I think that's why people really like it, because, many things, or most of the things you need, you get when you install or use OpenShift.
Yeah, the out-of-the-box experience. Exactly. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And, of course, the replication. So it was a huge thing, I remember.
Yes, absolutely. It was absolutely innovative. I don't think anyone else had something similar like that at that time. Because at that time, right, yes, 20 years ago, people started to do web applications, but really most of them, like 95% probably, used the rich desktop client.
Yeah.
Okay, and for them to be able to replicate was just perfect, right? Because the network was slow, and you would be able to travel and so forth. So replication was a huge thing for sure.
Mm-hmm. So what's also interesting back then, the CouchDB was a huge hit. So and Node wasn't that. So what is interesting now, if you repackage something, just with a little bit marketing, it becomes huge. But Nodes had the same technology for years, and no one was really interested because the name was Nodes and Domino. It's not that funky like CouchDB, right? This is
back then, right? There was actually a huge interest. I mean, there were literally thousands of customers and 10,000s of applications that were built with the technology.
Yeah, but not amongst developers, This is more like a more business interest.
Exactly, right? It was more like the line of business developers, let's say, right?
Yeah, exactly.
The people who don't code the full day, but, work in a department and need to provide some tools for their colleagues. And yes,
So how you learn Java? So you started with the workflow applet, but you had to know Java. So what was your road to Java?
At that time, Java was pretty new. I think it was only around for like 1 or 2 years. I don't know. It was pretty new. And I think I just learned it myself, as I do it most of the times. I look for samples. I look for documentation. Because I'm not sure whether I actually had a Java course at university or whether that was only by working for the employer. I don't know. I think the way I work in general is when I have a problem, I try to find something similar and try to use that as a starting point or try to use it to learn from. And then, see how far I get.
Okay. And you like Java from the beginning, or what was your impression?
Absolutely. I think it was a really clean programming language. Again, it was much more lightweight and simpler than today, obviously, right? Because it has grown like crazy over the last 20 years, maybe even too much in some areas. It was relatively easy, right? I mean, but the applet thing, obviously, right, didn't really work, right? It was way too slow, way too buggy, browser problems. So, I wasn't the biggest Java fan because of that, because it just didn't work in the front end. And I did front end work with Java, right? And to be honest, I built this thing, but it was never productized because it didn't work well enough. And it wasn't, I don't think it was really my fault. Maybe it was also my fault because I didn't recognize it or didn't see it earlier, but the technology was just not there.
Okay. And why IBM bought your startup? They wanted to acquire the product or the knowledge?
Yes. Well, actually, both, right? The product, definitely. So it used to be called, how did we call it back then? Processware or something, I think. One Stone Processware, and then it became Lotus Workflow. So they took over the project, and at that time, it was pretty successful. So there was several bigger organizations who used it, but obviously they were also interested in getting new people, right? People with the skills that they would need, and it wouldn't have to teach or learn, educate. So it was a combination. Even though, as far as I remember, from the 100 people that worked for that startup, only 10 got an offer to come over.
100 people in a startup. These are crazy.
Yeah, it grew really, really fast. Like when I started there 2 years earlier, or was it 1 year earlier? I don't know. It was like 10 people.
Okay.
and their strategy was to grow, right?
Yeah.
They just wanted to grow, and they grew way too fast, right?
Yeah.
because there were many problems. You wouldn't get good people, and a lot of communication issues and so forth. But yeah, that was their strategy to grow as fast as possible in terms of people, not in terms of business necessarily. Well, that was also the goal, obviously, but it didn't work out.
Yeah.
So the acquisition was certainly the best thing that could happen at that time for everyone who worked there.
This happened all over the place back then. So I remember all startups wanted to grow like crazy, and I never got it. It's like, why? This is actually crazy business strategy. Just you are growing, you're increasing the risk that you have you have to have more and more revenue, and this was just crazy. But no one had actually some talks with the managers and owners from some startups back then, and no one could explain me why they are doing this. They just wanted to grow, because they say if they don't grow, they won't become relevant. So yeah, but I mean, who cares?
No, you're right. Now that you mentioned it was pretty common at that time. Absolutely.
Yeah. And your startup was in Paderborn as well?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
Cool. And
so as I said, there was this big IBM Nodes Domino community here at the university, and pretty much everyone who worked for that startup came from that university.
Cool. And how was the living in Boston? So were you amazed about your working environment in Boston? Were you disappointed back then, or what was your spirit the first month?
The work environment was awesome.
Okay.
I had a nice office in the 6th floor with a view over the city. It was amazing. And I was so young, and I had this office. I was really proud. It was perfect. We had a great team, really motivated people.
Mm-hmm.
It was really fun to work there for sure. Again, the main problem was that my English was so bad. So I had to catch up there. But then other than that, the living was okayish. Let's put it this way. They put me in an apartment right in the middle of the city, and let's say I had some issues with cockroaches and mice, and I mean, it was crazy.
So it was bio apartment. You had lots of animals, right?
Yeah, it was a living apartment. Yeah.
Okay.
It was.
And you couldn't change, or why? Because
I tried everything, and they gave me something that was a little bit better, and I survived. It was only for like the first year, and then I took my own apartment, and that one was much better.
Okay.
So.
And what you did then? So you kept working on your product, or you switched tasks, or what?
Yeah, well, obviously, right? I've worked for IBM now for 20 years, and that sounds scary for many people, but the thing is that IBM is so big, you can do different things like every year or whenever you want. This is one of the main reasons why I love working for IBM, which is they give you the chance to change, to develop yourself, your skills, to try other things, right? And I used to work in different development teams. I worked on core development tasks at some point. I used to be an architect at some other point, a lead architect for Nodes Domino app dev capabilities. Then I worked more on community-related aspects, and I had some responsibilities that had to do basically more with product development, with offering management than the development part. So, it's pretty cool that you can try all of these different things in one company. Very convenient.
But in Boston, you stick with the workflow.
Yeah, I don't remember exactly how long it was, but at least 2 years, I would guess. Mm-hmm. And then we figured out, the workflow tool that we built was not the only workflow tool within IBM, but there were actually 18.
Okay.
And that was obviously crazy. So we sat together and defined a strategy to really focus on basically one. Mm-hmm. And to build one that can be used in all of these different scenarios. Mm-hmm. And the biggest other one was I'm not sure how it was called back then, WebSphere Workflow, I think it was, or Process Choreography. Mm-hmm. I think WebSphere Workflow at that mm-hmm. point. And so we teamed up with the German team here in Böbling, because that's where most of that development was done. And we built together with them the next version of WebSphere Workflow. Mm-hmm. And that was all Java. And my responsibility was to lead a team of developers who would develop the front end.
Okay.
And I think it was the JS piece at that time. So again, that was when I was working with Java again.
Okay. And back then, until then, it was Java. So you did Lotus script, or what was the language you wrote?
I think it was most of the time, in that time, really Java. And I don't think I have done a lot with the Lotus script.
Okay. And which IDE you used? Visual H for Java? Or?
Visual H for Java, exactly.
Okay. Which was amazing, actually. The only strange thing about Visual H for Java was you were only able to see one single method. Remember that? Because it operated on a repository. So you had to export the code. So Yeah. So how Visual H
was really, really slow. That is the main thing that I remember.
It wasn't that slow. As if the project was huge, it was slow. But what I liked, by the way, back then, I really liked IBM because for me, I also started early with Java, but IBM had really interesting things. For instance, they had the AlphaWorks, I think, was the page. AlphaWorks, and DeveloperWorks, and there was weekly new small projects and libraries which were really interesting. Then this Visual H for Java came out, and what I liked, the look and feel was completely different to other Java projects. So there was always a fresh look, fresh branding and design. So I liked the design back then. Mm-hmm. And what IBM also did, they had somehow cooperation with the Palm Pilot, I remember. And there was Java integration, which ran on Palm Pilot, which I was really excited back then. So IBM, for me, back then was like a Java innovator. It still is, but back then there was no less choices. So Oracle was also similar back then. They also innovated a lot, but IBM did the AlphaWorks thing and DeveloperWorks. What I didn't like a lot was the website itself. It was a little bit slow, but the whole other environment I really appreciated back then.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And IBM also did a lot in terms of advocating Java. I think we had one of the first teams, if not the first team, with a bunch of people whose responsibility it was only to promote Java at conferences, go out and talk about it.
And what
examples.
What IBM had back then, I remember, it was the first attempt. It was like a simple Graal VM. So it was called. You remember that? It was a JVM from IBM where you could cross-compile bytecode to native code. I will have to look it up. You know what I mean? Okay. There was and there was and they also had a
there was something, yes.
Yeah, and they had also a compiler written in assembly or something, which was crazy fast. So there's two things were really interesting. So and we have to look it up because the compiler was a crazy fast compiler from IBM, where just because the Java compiler is written in Java, and the IBM compiler was somehow optimized, so it was crazy fast. And this and there was the optimized JVM. It's like J9 right now. There was different name back then, so we'll have to look it up. So perfect. So for me, it was like IBM was a really interesting company, and
it
still
Java. Is.
Yeah, it is, still is, but it's completely different right now. And back then was now it's even more interesting, but back then was more, let's say, exciting for me. As a young Java developer, and IBM came with crazy ideas right away. So for me, it was interesting to watch. Okay, so you spent lots of your time with Java, JSPs, and Workflow. So what happens after IBM Workflow?
I worked on IBM Nodes Domino directly.
Okay.
I mean, I did many things, but one of the key things that I did was to work on the application development model for IBM Nodes Domino, especially in the 8 release. And at that point, I was the lead architect.
Okay.
With a pretty big team actually on 3 continents. And that was, very interesting and everything. But, one thing I didn't like was that I didn't really have enough time to develop myself anymore.
Okay.
I don't know how many people, but there was certainly 40 developers, and I basically would only do project management and high-level architecture, drawing boxes, and that was something that I, at some point, didn't really like anymore. The other problem was that at that time, I guess, we hadn't really listened closely enough to customers, what they wanted. And I think what we wanted to build, what we called composite applications, basically like a portal for Nodes Domino, wasn't really what our customers wanted. So, I think that project went on for, 2, maybe even 3 years. And after that, people didn't really want it.
Okay.
So that was very disappointing. And that's when I basically changed again completely. And I said, that doesn't make sense. We need to change the model we operate. And there was a really strong community around IBM Nodes Domino, many loyal customers and partners, freelancers. And they had this open source site, opentf.org, but without any governance model, without a legal model or anything, right? Run by only one single person. And I said, we should really, support our community. We should really work closer together with them to understand what they need. Mm-hmm. And that's when I basically started for the next 5 years to work on basically OpenNTF.org. Okay. As a tech lead for the technical committee lead. And so we created a non-profit organization. We brought in 10 or more than 10 partners who would represent their companies in the different boards. We introduced an IP model, mm-hmm. Which licenses you could use. We had an IP manager who would do IP clearance. So OpenNTF at that point really grew to a really professional open source site. And basically we kind of mirrored the best from Eclipse and Apache. We basically learned from them and created something for IBM Nodes Domino. Mm-hmm. Because on Eclipse and Apache, probably nobody would have recognized it. So we wanted to have our own site. And that was really successful for the next years. There were many contributions. I ran many development contests with many people. It was a great time, a lot of fun. And I really enjoyed to be able to work that closely together with the developers who actually used our technology. I think that was really the best thing.
Mm-hmm. What's fascinating? Two things. One, what you already said about in Boston, that you recognize that there were several workflow teams, and the developer met and tried to refactor, think what could be the future by merging the efforts. And the next thing is what you also said right now is that you saw as an architect, a community, and you think, okay, I would like to support that. Why it's interesting? Because usually, if you are not inside a company and you would observe a huge company from the outside, someone could say, hey, evil IBM, they are just, killing one great workflow product. And what happens actually inside is a completely different story. Or the same story with the community. You decided to support the community. It was your personal decision. And someone could observe on a reporter, whoever, IBM from the outside, and say, hey, now IBM invests, heavily into communities, and they try, I don't know what, break their competition or whatever. And this is always, such a larger decision sometimes in huge companies. They happen by, ideas, during their lunch break by, architects, developers, or whoever. And this is fascinating because there is no huge IBM or huge Oracle or huge whoever. This is just,
Absolutely.
people with ideas.
I couldn't agree more. Sometimes when I hear external people talk about IBM, they, as you said, right, they say IBM thinks, IBM wants.
Yeah,
this is in most cases really not the case.
And it was the same with Sun Microsystems. Okay, Sun had, for instance, 2 research centers, and there was really the question about what they spoke back then, because there were one in the near of San Francisco, the other near of New York, as I remember, and they had complete different ideas. Oracle the same, evil Oracle something. There's not evil Oracle. Someone decided something, and probably the CTO or CEO from Oracle or IBM have absolutely no idea what even OpenNTF or whatever is, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Cool. And this is why I ask you so many questions about the Boston, to find out how it actually works. So you had your time with your product, and at one point you say, okay, now it's time to optimize or refactor that, and this was decision from bottom-up decision, and you went to managers and say, we could optimize something. Is this how it works?
You mean when I did the community part?
Yeah, community part and the Boston part. The
community idea, yes, that was actually my own idea. So that role didn't even exist. So I worked together with my tech leads and executives.
Yeah, but you had to go to executive and go and say, look, this is what you have to do. You have to sell the idea first, and then you got the approval, and then you go for it, right?
Exactly.
And in Boston was similar. So you had we have too many workflow products. We should work with Germany or something, or was it?
At that point I was certainly more junior, right? And that was, I wasn't really involved. Well, I was involved after the decision was basically made. But it wasn't really me. It was really my tech leads at that time.
Okay.
And other people.
Okay.
So I can't take the credit for that.
And the Nodes community is still vibrant. So I lost track about Nodes. So it's still vibrant and operating, or?
To be honest, I also lost a little bit track
Okay.
because there's too many other things that I'm really working on. I know that IBM sold the whole collaboration business, IBM Nodes Domino and Connections, and same time and others to HCL.
HCL, okay.
And as far as I understand, most of the developers from IBM actually moved there as well. So they didn't only buy the product, but also the people.
Okay.
And it looks like there's some sort of revival going on. Like there's a whole, people at HCL are very motivated. And but I can't really comment. Okay. I know too little about what's really going on there right now.
When was it with OpenNTF, your involvement with the Nodes community? Remember that?
Yes, it was, many different things. The most important thing was to establish a real organization, because for IBM to be able to participate in something like that, we had to have clear rules. Like, we as IBM, for example, right, we couldn't easily, let's say, participate in an open source site that would allow licenses like GPL, let's say. Okay, so that was a problem. So we basically started to create a new organization. We pulled in partners, which was my job to find them and to get them motivated. Obviously it wasn't only me, but it was also part of my job. We had to build up this legal system governance model, right? Had to find an IP manager, had to get all the approvals in place, etc. So that was the first time, and that took longer than I wanted. I don't know how long it took, maybe like a year or so. And people from the outside said, "Oh, look at IBM. Wants to help OpenNTF, and all they do is slow down things." So that was the first reaction.
Okay.
But once we had these models established, it became very successful, right? Because we could do all of these, development contests, which were a lot of fun as well. And then, since we now established this new OpenNTF organization, right? We as IBM were able to publish a lot of open source there. So before that, actually, we hadn't done it. We couldn't. We were not allowed to legally. Okay. And then we could publish so much stuff, like X pages is a development model in IBM Nodes Domino at least at that time. And we published lots of extensions for that programming model on OpenNTF. And we basically asked all developers within our organization to contribute whatever they like. If they have a tool, contribute it. We actually put it in the goals of the IBM developers internally, that they at least once a year they should open source something, right? So we really pushed this forward, and it worked out very well. And also, since at that time I had more time again to work on not only the organizational things, I was able to build code myself. Okay, so I used that website, that organization, to experiment with things. For example, I showed how to build your first mobile apps with web development. Okay, and so I basically extended X pages to be able to run devices with an optimized to build applications optimized for mobile devices, right? And at some point, after like a year of experimenting with these things, the code was actually moved back into the code and into the product. Okay, and it became an official feature from IBM Nodes Domino. So I think that was a great model, right? You would work out there in the open and then put it back into your product. It's kind of like, the whole model of Red Hat, right? With their upstream projects, and then actually, having also a commercial version of those.
Which year was it? When was it roughly?
That was from 2010 around.
Oh, okay.
I would say.
And what happens then? So you after OpenNTF, so what you did then?
After OpenNTF, I did a couple of little things, but then the next bigger thing was that I was looking for another bigger change, and I wanted to do more with the cloud. That's so like 6 years ago, I think. Maybe 5, I don't remember exactly. The cloud came up, right? And I found that very, very interesting, right? This capability for developers to literally click together the hardware you need within minutes. This was amazing. Because before that, as you know, right, you had to buy hardware. You had to find maybe an administrator to install new application server versions or security fixes. And now you could just go to the cloud, click, I need an application server. Here you go. So I wanted to learn more, and I started at that time to work in a team, in the first IBM team responsible for developer outreach. So basically a team of developer advocates. And that was part of the IBM Emerging Technologies organization where I worked. And that allowed me to learn many other technologies, the cloud, lots of things about, databases. AI came a little bit sooner than or later. And obviously Java, NodeJS, Cloud Foundry, a little later Docker, obviously, right? And then up to now with Kubernetes and Istio and Knative and Tekton and serverless and what have you.
Yeah, but what you did exactly? So you wrote like sample apps, or you had some?
Yeah, exactly. So I guess two things. One, we visited lots of international conferences, right? And we had a booth and sessions and so forth. Again, we did development contests, and then the second part was to build samples, because at that point we certainly didn't have enough samples, because the product development teams, they were focused more on the actual services rather than samples. And then, as I noticed, and this is not IBM specific, but in general, right, many times you can see the organization of a company in what services and products they deliver, right? Which means you have one team responsible for service A, another team for service B. And then what is often missing are samples that show you how to use both together and when does it make sense and so forth, right? So the samples that I created were mostly about how to use all of these different things together to do something that you couldn't do before.
And was it your idea, or was it like a sponsorship from the IBM cloud, or what was behind? So why you did the samples? To promote what?
Well, the samples is one of my favorite things, and I think that's something that basically came from me. I mean, I didn't create the team. That was just the new team of developer advocates just started like a couple of weeks or months earlier. But I always wanted to write code and new things, bleeding edge stuff that nobody else had ever done. And that's for me personally the most interesting thing, because I love learning new things and I like doing things that other people haven't done yet. So for me to give the same talk 2 or 3 times is rather boring.
Yeah, exactly.
So always trying to find something new, the next big thing, and try to think about, okay, how could it make value for our customers, for our developers? What is missing? And a good example is this cloud native starter pack sample, right? That I created here this year with 2 of my colleagues. Because when I looked at the beginning of this year, for samples, which samples are available for MicroProfile, Istio, Kubernetes, and then Java, OpenLiberty. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of samples, and certainly since the beginning of this year, many new samples have been added. But the one thing that I was missing is the one application that shows you a full end-to-end enterprise application, with a nice front end, with some microservices, with databases, SQL, NoSQL, with authentication, authorization, and I didn't really find any of that. I searched in the internet, I asked colleagues, and that's when I decided that it would be cool to have, a new sample that shows how to use these things together. And then I could blog about it. The blogs were pretty popular, and I could use it on many different conferences to talk about. And yeah, I mean, it's I think a really good way for people to start writing microservices, right? So my focus was, so the only samples that I found, right, were samples that were way too complicated to start with. Most of them you couldn't even run locally because they would require, more than 30 gigabyte of RAM or something. And for a starter, it needs to be simpler. And especially when we talk about all of these technologies like Java and Istio and Kubernetes and MicroProfile, there's a lot of stuff people have to learn, at the same time. So I wanted to make the example as consumable as possible, especially for the first time experience, right? So we wrote a lot of scripts so that you can install and set up these different pieces, separately and very easily.
Yeah. One question before we start about talking about the Cloud Native starter is you are a team lead of evangelist. This is your role right now?
Yeah, I guess that's fair. Yeah.
Okay. So it's similar to, I don't know whether, as I know, Sun had also the Java EE and Java evangelist at Sun. So this is similar role right now, what you are doing here at IBM, right? What happened?
I think so. It's I mean, it's all, titles and roles is always difficult to.
Yeah. No, but just explain, not roles, but the task.
But it's the same.
Not
roles,
the task,
close.
Yeah. Or the mission, the similar mission, let's say.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Okay. And you approached me at the JAX conference. This was last year. This year. And this year. And I had to say I was really overloaded with work. So it is amazing what happened. So the interests in Jakarta and MicroProfile this year are way beyond possible. I got requests from larger companies and smaller companies more and more are interested because of the productivity of the whole thing. And you approached me again at the WJAX conference to say, okay, this is now, I really have to do something. And I reviewed the whole Cloud Native starters. I looked through the code a little bit.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Nice.
Not the NodeJS, the Java parts, a little bit Kubernetes and all the settings. And I have to say, in mostly, it is really pragmatic. So what I don't like in most examples, they are somehow over-engineered. This is hard to tell. So really, most examples, this is why I also created the Maven archetypes for Jakarta EE and backed in Java, because what I saw in the internet, this was why they started, with several plugins. I had no idea why they need plugins. I never use any plugins in production. And you are similar pragmatic. So,
yes,
exactly. The two articles and authors, two microservices you delivered. The POM looks like my POM, so there is nothing in it. So no POM inheritance, nothing. About the code, it could be still simplified. So you had already a DAO, which I think is not needed. So I would write less code. But if I find some time, I could create a pull request and.
That would be awesome! Absolutely.
Yeah. But I will delete some
you're
stuff.
Right. It's always you always need to find the right balance, right? I mean, you don't want to open source and use a hack to educate people, right? It needs to be something more solid. At the same time, you don't want to over-engineer to make it too complicated, to add too many abstractions and overhead and things you just don't need. Yeah, it's always certainly balance.
But what I really like, you deliver, I just opened the code right now. So you have a Docker file, Docker Pure Java, and you have Quarkus. You even delivering a Docker file with Quarkus. Kubernetes with OpenShift. So what I also find interesting that you are also delivering not only scripts for OpenShift or Minishift, but I can also find the complete Kubernetes YAML files.
Exactly.
And this is added value because you see what happens or what Cloud Native really means, and what you basically did, you have two examples. One is articles and authors accesses a database with JPA or in memory. And the articles has, as far as I know, there is no persistence involved, I think. And you also have vue.js front end, which accesses the backend. And then, you have an ingress controller. So you try, to show how the infrastructure, everything fits together, even with istio.
Yeah, exactly.
And
Yeah,
go ahead.
I just wanted to say istio. We added istio so that we could especially demonstrate how easy it is to do things like traffic management. This sample that we have there is this A/B testing, or not A/B testing. It's traffic routing, 80-20%, and all you need to do is this, one simple YAML file, and then everything works magically. You get a great monitoring with Kiali, a tool that is integrated with Istio. You see, the traffic flowing live in this tool. You see, when do errors occur, which invocations, where bottlenecks. So that's why we really wanted to put Istio in there. And also because we use it internally in many of our products. Plus also it's very easy to use on the IBM cloud, because, when you use the IBM Kubernetes service, there are add-ons, and you can install Istio with just one click. It's an add-on, and, one click you have it. And that's what I kind of like. I mean, I know there are other solutions, as we talked about briefly, right, in terms of how you would do things like A/B testing, canary rollouts, and stuff. But sometimes they are proprietary or not that sophisticated, and Istio is really good there because it gives you all these capabilities. There's big companies behind it, right? Not only IBM but primarily Google and others. There's a lot of stuff going on, and it's getting much and much easier to use. So that's why we added that part, and also because, as you know, there is some overlap between MicroProfile and Istio. Right, and I found this article from Emily, the MicroProfile lead, that she wrote, I think. Yes, exactly. Mm-hmm. That she wrote like a couple of months ago, and that was exactly about when should you use what, and I couldn't agree more with her. And her statement was, and that's my recommendation now as well. For everything, for all the features where you can use Kubernetes or Istio, in other words, these generic platforms, do it. But only for the things that you cannot do generically, you have to do in frameworks like MicroProfile. For example, application-specific metrics or application-specific authorization, right? Those are things you cannot handle with Istio or Kubernetes. But other things like, fault injections or, again, this traffic management or other security things, right? You don't have to put in your code. This is done with Istio, all the invocations, the invocation chains, etc., right? You can see easily. And so that's kind of the recommendation. And that's one of the main points I wanted to bring across here when to use what technology.
Yeah, I think we should meet in a couple of weeks and just discuss Istio because it's not that easy. So Istio is going to be
you're right. Istio could be a topic on its own.
Yeah. The Istio, if Istio becomes part of the OpenShift in OpenShift 4,
yes.
then I would just use
already
it
right now, right? It's in 4.2.
Yeah, I would just use it. And the more interesting part is if you have MicroProfile fault tolerance, like the annotations. Is it better, to code to use the fallbacks and retries in source code? They're using Istio. And so in my personal opinion right now is the MicroProfile, I would go with MicroProfile. And the reason is you see everything in one place. So it's easier to test. And in Istio, you have to look at the configuration of Istio to understand, all the patterns. And for me, it reminds me on the early J2E where I had to look at the deployment descriptor and the source code to understand what's going on. But everything else, and I think the killer feature is, of course, certificate distribution. This is where Istio shines as one of the killer features. I would like to manage this by myself. So I think Istio is just going to be used without any hype. This is like right now in OpenShift, there is already Docker registry built in, and no one talks about that. It's just used, as many don't even recognize that we have Docker registry.
Legacy at some point.
Yeah. So this is what happens. But what I did right now is I was just curious. What you also come with, you have a Spring Boot example, which I just also reviewed that. I was just curious what you did, which has the most complicated build system, and I just built it right now, and it is the largest jar. So they have 44 megs, which had to be deployed. Everything else is tiny. So
to be honest. That part is certainly not complete. Okay. So we did the MicroProfile part. That was what we really focused on. And then I tried to pull in an expert, from another team, an expert for Spring Boot.
Okay.
And I tried to get him to implement the same services for Spring Boot so that you could compare Spring Boot versus MicroProfile.
Mm-hmm.
While he was interested, he didn't really have enough time to work on it, unfortunately, at least until now. So I would love to extend the Cloud Native Starter for Spring Boot because, as you know, if there are 12 million Java developers, as you hear, 6 million are Jakarta, MicroProfile, and 6 million are Spring Boot. So I would love to extend that example. But right now, this is really just a very, first starting point for Spring Boot and something that is not complete. Okay. And also something that we haven't even talked about. There's no block or anything. So this is kind of a dark launch kind of thing.
I just built it behind the scenes right now and it worked right away. So I have my articles, authors jar and it worked. So I would just look.
Yeah, no, it does work. I mean, we don't commit things that don't work, but there's again no documentation, no blocks, and also things like there are no application specific metrics. There's no resiliency built in, and all of these things that they're still missing, right? So there's
but it's an already nice comparison between what you have to do with
absolutely.
Spring Boot and MicroProfile. What I see, you have dependencies like starter actuator and starter data JPA and starter web. So this actually, you see what's the difference. So it's interesting. It comes from somewhere else. I get the question of what is the comparison Spring Boot and MicroProfile. I cannot say that because I do 100% Jakarta in MicroProfile and see sometimes Spring Boot, but it's not my core projects I'm doing. And now, really interesting because you are a Nodes developer, and you also created the Node.js example.
Yes.
So
yeah, I.
What is your opinion about Node.js?
Well, I really like Node.js. Okay, first of all, it's fun to work with. It's fun to develop. And I did quite a lot with it. Like, maybe when was it 2-3 years ago? I built a tool to create basically skills for personal assistants. Things like Alexa and what have you, right? Google Home, etc. And I built a tool which was purely web based. So you could define your skills, your intents, your entities, all of these things. And that was a lot of code, and I used a lot of TypeScript, and it was basically running in the front end. There was also Node.js in the back end for everything else. And it was a lot of fun to work with that technology. There are so many tools, and I guess the thing that I like most about it is the innovation. There's lots of stuff going on, and all the cool kids feel sometimes, they use Node.js these days. And it's good that there is so much innovation, and that brings me to one of the main issues, right? Which is, I think, recognized by many people, which is that sometimes you have an issue to identify, your stack that you want to use. Which NPM modules do you want? Can you rely on them? Do you know that they are maintained? So that's the thing that I don't really like about it, and that sometimes you pull in this huge amount of dependencies, and you don't even understand anymore what it is and where it comes from. So in some cases you don't have the type of standardized platform as Jakarta, for example, right, or Java EE, which you could basically rely on that it won't break anything, or at least not with deprecating and then whatever. So that's, so there's certainly good and bad things, but again, the thing that I like about it is the speed, in which things happen, the huge amount of NPM modules. You can find basically a module for everything, which is good and bad at the same time.
And if you compare, I would say, productivity from Node.js with MicroProfile, in focus not on Alexa skills rather than, you would say, business project.
Yeah.
What is the impression? So how fast are you with Node.js or MicroProfile? Is it comparable? So what's your impression?
It's hard to say, but I would rather think that I, at least like a year ago, I was probably more productive with Node. Because, things like invoking REST APIs and then, doing the serialization of JSON objects and stuff, right? I mean, you get this for free in JavaScript. This has been around forever, right? Now, finally, with MicroProfile, you get this REST client, who does these things for you as well. So, I think Java has, and especially MicroProfile, has done a great job there to provide these tools that you really need, the most common things to build these microservices. And then also other things like, I mean, for Node.js, it has been able forever to do things like hot code replace from your IDE, like you use Visual Studio Code. You do Control S and bang, your application is already refreshed, right? And you can, within milliseconds, can start to try the change or to debug it, right? And as you know, now with MicroProfile and OpenLiberty and Quarkus, you can do that finally also. And that's why I think Java has catched up a lot this year. There's a lot of stuff and cool stuff going on with Java. Like a year ago, I would say the winner in terms of productivity was probably Node.js.
For me, it's actually interesting to hear because if both are comparable, then they are comparable. It's not like Node.js is orders of magnitude more productive than MicroProfile. But what I already heard from Node.js developers, in larger projects, this reloading is not as fast as the smaller one. So Node also gets slower, if you have lots of modules. And the interesting part would be to compare a large Node.js system with a larger MicroProfile or Jakarta system. Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. So where people can find you, and what are the links on the internet?
Well, everyone can find me on Twitter. My direct tweets are open. N Heidloff, N for Nicholas, and then my last name, Heidloff. Mm-hmm. And I also have my own blog, my last name, heidloff.net.
Mm-hmm. Cool. And the link to the Cloud Native Starter?
Yeah, good point. So probably the easiest way to do is just to go to Google and search for Cloud Native Starter, and it should be the first search result. Mm-hmm. If you don't find it there, go to the IBM organization on GitHub, and that you can find it there as well. Mm-hmm.
And by the way, the compiler, I just remember the name, is Jikes. This was the compiler written in C, which was crazy fast from IBM. Mm-hmm. Jikes.
Yeah, it's funny. Things, keep repeating itself. Like, what's going on with Quarkus now and the GraalVM. This is awesome. This is incredible. I'm really amazed.
So see you in a few weeks, month, or conferences. So thank you and bye.
Thanks a lot for having me. Bye.